Thank you for inviting us to share the presentation that Mary and I did for our Fall Iowa Library Association virtual conference with you today for your SLIM webinar series. My name is Marlys Lien, and I am the adult programming librarian at the Council Bluffs Public Library and the SLIM alumni of December 1996 in Grand Forks, North Dakota, with the Distant Learning Program. At that time, I was living in West Fargo, North Dakota, and we had classmates driving from South Dakota, Montana, North Dakota, Minnesota, and Canada for classes at UND in Grand Forks. I remember the chuckles I got in a class for a presentation that I entitled Travel and Learn on a topic of senior citizen educational travel, when here we all were traveling for SLIM to obtain our MLS. At the time, I was thrown for a total loop because it didn't occur to me that I had just cracked a pun. Does your library have a special collection full of rich historic details about the community you serve? While relatively few people actively seek out primary local history materials, everyone loves to hear stories about the place that they live. This presentation will discuss how to get your community to engage with your local history collections using social media, traditional media, and library programming. Finally, the presentation will explore ways to get people in your community to share their own stories. Shortly after I moved to Council Bluffs in 2006, I learned of how the city loves to remember and honor its history. As I got acquainted, I found that there were a number of organizations and museums in the community that were experts in their piece of its history and eager to share this knowledge. Programs literally fell into my emails. How do I connect and learn about all these opportunities? Well, I schmooze with the community people and the organizations. I join community organizations and attend community events. Sometimes programs come to me via emails through the library director, and sometimes I seek out a contact for an event that is going on locally or ties to something historical for Iowa or the nation. There are two formats that I have capitalized on: individuals that are experts in their stories, and collaborative programs utilizing multiple groups, each providing a piece of the story for the theme of the event. First, the individuals. One that fell in my email in 2014 was a plea from the Durham Museum in Omaha to collaborate by providing a venue for their reenactor to highlight their exhibit on Rosie the Riveter. This event brought a room full of real Rosies from Council Bluffs area to attend and share their stories. Another individual program that I had was on the Chautauqua of 1889 by Ryan Roenfeld, who's a local historian and author. With pictures and stories, he helped us relive the time from our community's past. In 2015, we had Amelia Jenkins Bloomer by Danette Heinz Snyder from the historic General Dodge House, who loves to dress in time period clothing to help bring the past to life. She shared her passion for Bloomer's story of fighting for suffrage and women's rights through her newspaper publishing, through work with the organizations fighting for the right to vote, and of course, her rebel clothing. Another local individual was a middle school teacher who stopped by one day at the reference desk and proposed an idea near and dear to his knowledge on the pre-1850 history of Council Bluffs, which he entitled The Ties That Bind. Troy took us back in time with photos and artifacts to the pre-pioneer times, when Native Americans called our Los Hills home, and the traders and trappers came through long before we were Canesville, with the Mormons settling briefly here. My only problem with his programs is that he talks fast and gets easily sidetracked by the audience's questions. I've done a number of Humanity Iowa's programs which link to our local history. For example, I had O.J. Fargo do his Civil War presentation just before the battle to link with General Dodge here in town, who made a name for himself during the Civil War. Fargo has had his guns with him, unloaded, of course. I also had Tom Milligan from the Des Moines area bring his Grant Woods presentation to link with our local Hotel Chieftain, where Grant painted a mural in the dining room of the Iowa countryside. Pieces of this mural are on exhibit here in Council Bluffs at the Pace Arts Gallery. And in 2019, Tom also gave us his Cartoons and Conversation, a visit with Ding Darling, about our Iowa Pulitzer Prize winning editorial cartoonist, to help me focus on Comic Book Day in May. Recently, I had Lori Vickers share her story and knowledge on remembering the orphan train, because one of our longtime residents in Council Bluffs had been one of these orphans. And again, this brought local individuals with their connections to the orphan train to share their stories too at the program. She had a trunk load of photos, children's clothing, and books, both fiction and nonfiction, to augment her presentation. The really fun and very well attended collaborative event started with a focus on our City Hall's 75th anniversary in
This presentation style leaves a lot to be desired. It's really annoying.
A slideshow with a slideshow of its history from when City Hall was built, which ran for folks to see while they were touring the building during the anniversary, led to a discussion by those that created it that it really needed to be shown again at the library so that all the work done to create it could be seen by more of the community. And one thing led to another, and soon we had Happy Days Council Bluffs in the 1930s as our first of many collaborations with the mayor, the Historical Society of Pottawatomie County, Bluffs Arts Council, and the library, tied to commemorate the City Hall's 75th anniversary. This event was loosely planned for an hour and a half, divided among 5 speakers. Some just talked, others shared photos to aid the walk down memory lane. Well, you guessed it, we went way over. The library meeting room was crowded with folks who enjoyed seeing all of the photos from their beloved city in the days gone by of the 1930s. With that huge success under our belt from Happy Days events, this community wanted to keep going. What decade should we do next? We jumped way back in time to Council Bluffs in the 1890s. Attendees learned about the events, art and culture, fashion and architecture of the decade, as well as me, portraying a library employee of the time and talking about the day-to-day work of the library that I had learned about from my research of the board minutes in our library archives. Yes, we have a fairly complete collection of the typed reports each library director submitted each month to the board. The Free Public Library of Council Bluffs moved into a new building in 1889, gaining lots of space and a beautiful facility on the second floor of a local business with an elevator. By the end of the decade, they were almost outgrown of this space, which led to the need for building a structure totally dedicated to library services, which became our Carnegie Library in 1905. A year later, in 2016, we were feeling groovy in the 60s. Urban renewal had decimated much of our downtown to bring a mall. So there was lots of before and after photos to share. We reminded the people of the news of the decade, the fashions of the decade, including me in my mother's hat and coat, and I was way too warm in it as I talked about the library in a room with over 100 people. In collaboration with the General Dodge House and the Historical Society of Pottawatomie County, with music of the era and the general developments of the city, such as the new airport, the interstate system, the Iowa West College, and groundwork that was laid for urban renewal. Just as the city of Council Bluffs was moving through many changes with transportation and urban renewal, the library too was looking for ways to improve their collection, their space. A copy machine for the first time was installed. We started circulating a new collection of framed art prints, and the youth room got an air conditioner. We celebrated the 60th anniversary of our building, which was now very overcrowded, and the first 100 years of the library service to the community. In 2017, I focused on Council Bluffs in World War I to commemorate the 100th anniversary. We had a collaboration with the Union Pacific Railroad Museum that focused on the railroads that helped the war efforts, with Preserve CB that focused on the historic houses of Council Bluffs, with the Historical Society of Pottawatomie County, focusing on the city and what was going on in it during these years, with the historic General Dodge House, with the 1st National Guard from Council Bluffs and Camp Dodge Soldiers Training Facility, and the library. This is my piece, again using the library board minutes from our archives with a Prezi presentation format. Being the curious person that I am, when I read the line in the budget, drayage, I had to go research. What's drayage? Well, it's shipping. Paying the horse-drawn wagon to deliver crates from the railroad to the library. A second interesting piece of the presentation came from the time that the library was helping to coordinate the high school and college typing classes to type hundreds of recipe cards to be distributed to the community on how to make bread without wheat flour. By now, with the 4th presentation under our belt, we were much better at timing. We even practiced ahead of time so that we didn't run over. We also, in the library, had 2 displays to promote the program. One was on the Iowa State Historical exhibit of original World War I propaganda posters. And the other was a display case filled with memorabilia of the war, uniforms, tools, guns and shells, and a focus also on Unit K, which was from Council Bluffs and was the first mobile hospital unit for World War I over in Europe. And in 2018, we commemorated the 75th anniversary of World War II in Council Bluffs on the home front. It was really a repeat of the previous year, working with my team of community historic collaborators, with an expansion this time on the music of the era. I mean, we were really into the swing. Again, my library story focused via another Prezi presentation on, thanks to those board minutes, how the library aided the community in their war efforts. Reference questions abounded on Japan and Germany. The state recommended that the libraries keep a complete record of all the men in the service from their community. We have in our archives black 3-ring notebooks, shelves of them, full of daily newspaper clippings in plastic sleeves. To conclude my part, a quote from the 1945 board minutes, which reflects the service a library does for its community. The end of the war had decided effects on the use of the library. A period of adjustment seemed to be required for our library patrons. During the summer months, when events were happening so fast, people seemed to be so intent on listening to their radios that there was less reading done. Following the surrender of Japan, it has taken some time for families to readjust to peacetime living. These have been families and veterans returning to Council Bluffs, and many of those who stayed here have had changes in work schedules and changes in jobs. Many of our patrons who were in service during the year have come back to the library for cards. Some of them have come for information for starting a business or for going to school and were sent to the reference desk. Others are coming in more all the time to browse and to get books for recreational reading. Thank you. And now over to Mary. Mary, unmute.
Okay, let's try that again. Although maybe you want me to stay muted, I don't know. My name is Mary Carpenter. I'm the Support Services Manager here at the Council Bluffs Public Library. I graduated from Emporia State. I actually went down to Emporia and graduated in December of 1997. And I'm getting a kick out of doing this today because in November, I think, of that year of 1997, I was one of 2 students that went to Warsaw, Poland with Dr. Herbert Achleitner and Dr. Roger Wyatt for their GlobeNet conference. And part of the big achievement of that conference back in 1997 was that we transmitted audio over the internet from Warsaw to Emporia. And I mean, the logistics of that at the time was, it was quite incredible. And of course now, 20 years later, it's, here we are. So I'm just getting a little kick out of doing this today. Other than Marlys is the one that's outgoing, doing all the programming. I'm more behind the scenes. Like I said, I started here in 1998, and I oversee the special collections area. And this is a picture of our special collections. Oh, and first I have to say, I'm not an archivist or conservator. I'm just a regular old librarian, a general librarian. So my philosophy when I started here was just not to kill anything. Our archives in our old Carnegie building were not housed in the most ideal conditions. So when we got over here, I made everything was in acid-free envelopes, Mylar sleeves, acid boxes. So what you see here is looking down the range. And what we have are books, yearbooks, hard copies of local newspapers, maps, photographs, ephemera, indexes, microfilm, and the archives from the local newspaper, the Council Bluffs Daily Nonpareil. And we mainly focus on Council Bluffs history and Potawatomi County history. And those blue boxes you see in the foreground, that range of shelving on both sides are all full of 35 millimeter negatives, the strips. And those come from the local newspaper. When they moved offices, they didn't have room for their archives, so we'll take it. We also have several databases that are available. We've got Ancestry that's available in-house. Our local newspaper, delightfully, is also digitally available from about 1857 to present day, which makes my job much easier to do. So with all of this, we're always been a goal to make the collection accessible from when I first started. Initially, we scanned, well, first of all, I'm trying to make sure everything's cataloged. Since I am the cataloger here, that's my ultimate goal. But when we catalog the photographs, we also scan the images and put an 856 link in the MARC record. And that's great for information, but it's not always great for browsing. But we did learn that patrons loved it. And if the system ever went down or the server crashed or didn't get updated, the patrons were the ones that let us know. So it was like that for a while. And then we moved our collection to Flickr. And Flickr was very good for browsing and discovery, but it wasn't necessarily good for metadata. You had to rely on tags, and if you needed to find the hard copy of that image, it wasn't the best system. And so currently we're using Omeka, which is an open source software that we've been using for several years to catalog our digital collection. And Omeka allows for browsing, and more importantly, allows for the addition of metadata. So we can put tags to it, we can put subject headings to it. If we need to reference back to the original file, the original digital file, or the original hard copy, we have a way of finding that. And that work is being done by 2 volunteers that unfortunately, since the pandemic happened, we have not had volunteers here at the library. So that work has sort of come to a halt. And I'm really itching to get them back because they are fabulous volunteers. I think you will all know when you get a good volunteer, you want to hang on to them. Also, this Omeka, it also allows, it's been helpful in that I'll get requests for pictures or something, and patrons, oh, well, I want pictures of Broadway. Well, here in Council Bluffs, we have a lot of pictures of Broadway. And so it offers the patron a point to browse, to figure out what they want. And then once they say, well, I want something like this picture, well, then I can maybe look through the collection for stuff that maybe hasn't been scanned yet. And that way it narrows their search down and makes it easier for both of us. And we get requests too from patrons, from businesses that just want stuff on their walls, or people from home, you know, they just want something in the man cave, and so they'll a particular picture they're looking for. So we get that a lot. And we use that to kind of help fundraise as well. Sharing on social media is basically how I show off the collection. And then, as I said, this also has resulted in us receiving donations, not necessarily just monetary donations, but also artifacts. Marlys mentions the World War I presentations she gave. We received letters that people have written during World War I from France. We've gotten programs from a movie theater here in town that burned down many years ago, and people still wax nostalgic for that movie theater. So, and it's also and like Marlys, and oddly enough, Marlys and I come from the same place up north. She was living in West Fargo. I was living in Fargo. So it's basically our adopted home, and I'm learning more and more about Council Plus, even as the research I do through here. And An example of that is the photo in the upper left-hand corner is a fire on Broadway. And I was using this for one of our Throwback Thursdays. And I was using our local newspaper for this, but then also shortly before I was doing this story, we received the logbooks from our local fire department. And so this fire happened in 1910. And so I was able to find the newspaper articles as well as seeing the fire department's report of that day. And it's very interesting. It was a very dry and windy day, and little fires were popping up all over town. We'll go on. So yes, I love a good cross-reference, like any good librarian would. This is a photograph that I believe is probably one of the earliest photographs we have of Council Bluffs. And this is looking west. This is Broadway. This is probably one of our earliest pictures of Broadway. And as you can see, there's the wagon trains heading west. And this picture's been dated anywhere from 1857 to 1868. So I decided to see if I could get a closer date on this photograph. So going through using city directories and the Daily Nonpareil, our local newspaper, as I kind of scanned it at high resolution, zoomed in, and I discovered that one of the buildings burned down in 1868. And so of course it's before 1868. And it was unfortunate because, speaking of newspapers, the Daily Nonpareil had just moved into that building like a month before it burned down. And then they lost everything. So, but also scanning this, I saw that there was a telegraph pole. So telegraph came to Council Bluffs in 1862. And then plus looking at the names of the businesses and when they were in business, when they left town, I determined that this was 1864. And so part of my blog post was just taking the patron through, zoomed in, here's the picture and here's the telegraph pole, and Bloom's Outfitting Company. I talked about the Blooms who owned that building. And there was another pharmacy where a fellow had a patent medicine business. He was just kind of making up his old medicine. So it was, again, another fascinating story of learning some of these names and stories behind early history. Our most popular posts are on Facebook, and they're called Throwback Thursday. And with this, I'll just pull a picture out of the collection. And if there was a picture from like the late 19th, early 20th century, I would have to provide more information of this is about the business, where it was located, because a lot of these buildings are no longer there, and get a little more background. But when I get to the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and as with Marlys's presentations, all I have to do is put the date and the address. And at that point, I leave it up to the patrons to fill in the story, and they will. They'll talk about how they went there as a kid, or their aunt used to work there, or was business owned by their grandparents, and oh, they had the best milkshakes here. And it's easy. Those are the easy posts for me. I'll just throw up a picture and let the patrons do the work after that. And there's plenty. Early citizens of Council Bluffs. This is a feature I started. We needed something for our digital newsletter. And we have a box of early citizens of Council Bluffs photographs. And I think they might have been gathered when somebody was writing a local history of Potawatomi County. Not sure why we have it, but we have it. And these two are, again, was a very interesting story as well. This is a Royal Amy and Lenora Amy. And again, learning about the collection, as I started researching these photographs, I realized We always thought they were husband and wife, but they're not. It's mother and son. And it was a very interesting family. They had a lot of drama in this family too. It's very interesting. But Lenora came to Council Bluffs in 1854, had about 5 kids. One's a newborn. Royal here was old enough that he had his own business. Well, Mr. Amy, the old man, decided to keep heading west and with another woman. So poor Lenora is here still with all the kids. And while Royal, no doubt, was helping out, Lenora started buying and selling real estate. And I think there were other women in town as well that took that on, who were widowed early, of course, widowed. And she, as I learned, and again, you have these resources that we had at the library of land transactions. We had on microfilm Potawatomi County land transaction, and using those indexes, I discovered all the times that she bought and sold property. And so over the course of her life, there was over 60 land transactions. And she owned a good chunk of downtown Council Bluffs. And not only her, I believe a daughter-in-law also speculated in real estate. And her husband, she did go back to Utah and got her husband, I think in 1863. I think he got into a little trouble back there and with some debtors or some creditors in Utah. And so they were reunited for a short while. Yeah, let me go on. And I think that's as far as I've gotten on this presentation. And the other thing, and again, sharing this we share this on our website and on the newsletter and with Facebook. And again, I think it's valuable for patrons. They kind of learn more about history. Sometimes this is relatives of theirs. It's also interesting doing these because you get a sense of, well, not only what life was like, because these people that I'm researching are very, they were society, and they had the money, and they had the education, and they had the connections. And I find when I'm doing these stories and I'm looking at somebody's obituary or story in the newspaper, I'll see something up in the corner of like, oh, that's another interesting story. So there's always more ideas. And one of the stories that I found was of Belle Clover, who was she ran a brothel in Council Bluffs, probably from the 1870s through the late 1880s. And again, it was sort of sensational stories. And I was like, oh my, this is a juicy little story. But as I started getting into that story a little bit more, you start thinking about, well, if you're a woman in 1870s Council Bluffs and you don't have money and you don't have the social connections, and your husband has gotten drunk and left you, or you find yourself in a family way, if you will, what do you do? And so that's my next little story that I'm working on you never know where those stories are going to pop up. And those also are maybe stories that never really got told. And so that's kind of what I'm working on too, is more stories about the women in Council Bluffs and maybe those stories that didn't necessarily make it into the history books. And there are stories that expand further than what we have here at the library. Marlys mentioned Mobile Hospital Number 1. And that was one of the first, it was Red Cross Hospital Unit K, and it was formed here in Council Bluffs. And when they got to France, they became the nucleus of this hospital unit. And this truly was like a MASH unit. They just started moving closer and closer and closer to the front lines. It was wet, it was brutal, it was horrific. And the nurses that went over there ranged in age from the late 20s to mid 50s. And I looked at that picture one day and I'm like, who are these women? And what just started is trying to find out, a little bit about them has expanded to finding out, what happened to them after the war. So we had resources here in the library, but I've reached out to cemeteries to get information. I've reached out to the National Archives, has the records of this hospital unit. One of the nurses spent 25 years in a mental hospital in Washington, D.C. She was there for 25 years. And her records are now at the National Archives. So yeah, your stories may seem local, but they will increase. And yeah, so serendipity. When it comes to the local history, I would encourage serendipity. And I think,
And again, in relation to that same story, we were having a tour of the library for Staff Development Day one year, right after or in the midst that Mary was doing all this research. And she was showing off the archive to all of the staff and saying, you know, this is what's back here in this closet room. And she happened to have the photo out of all those nurses, you know, one of these long things, you know, everybody's in the picture. And she told me and told all of us about how she was researching this stuff. And I went, haha, yeah, Mary, I'm, like I said, I always capitalize on what I hear and who I know and how I can bring our local history to life. And so I said, please, 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 will you give this program to our community and tell the community about Unit K and the mobile medical unit and these nurses. And she did.
I did. And also before all the pandemic, one of the volunteers that worked here, we also, we're in the early stages of putting together a podcast. I think we did actually 2 podcasts, again, of focusing on the women's story of Council Bluffs. And so Lenora Amy here was one of those stories. Just because she seemed like a tough woman and maybe she wasn't really, I don't think all that popular. She wasn't really part of society. You didn't see her in the society pages. And we also did a story on the Council Bluffs in 1853. We were also fortunate to have a journal of a Reverend Rice, who came to Council Bluffs in, I think, early 1850s, but while we were still Canesville, and was here he was here until about 1860 and then left, but then he came back. But he has some great stories of, like, there was a devastating fire in late 1853. This was like the hell on wheels kind of, if you've ever seen that show. That was the early Council Bluffs. It was, you know, muddy and fires and no trees. But I guess that kind of brings this to the end. Again, I'm hoping to do more of these stories on social media, especially now. I haven't put up much because not only were we closed for the COVID-19, but we were also transitioning our ILS. We were with Innovative, and we've transferred over to Circe Dynex. So I was the lead, one of the leads on that transition. So my duties were elsewhere for a while. So I'm hoping to get back more into doing more of the social programming online. So
Mary, why don't you stop your share screen and then we can get into chatting with these people.
Sure. If you have questions or comments or ideas. I know I probably talk too fast. I tend to babble and talk too fast, and but I really do. I love what I do.
So how do we handle copyright, Mary?
Well, with the stuff that we have, we own. Most of the photographs that we have in the collection are probably beyond copyright. There are a few things that that maybe, I know we have some things in the collection that we don't own copyright on, and then I just don't use those photos. And with the non-pareil, since they own the copyright, and basically they gave us the hard copies. Again, but if it ever comes to publishing, if somebody wants to use that in a published work, I would refer them to the non-pareil. But then we also have a photo reproduction agreement that we use if ever anybody ever wants to publish what we have. Let's see, any question? There we go. Oh.
The gang, my collaborators with me of the community, were trying to gear up for, isn't it time to do another program? Just about the time COVID hit. So they're kind of in limbo right now. And I'm guessing that by winter of 2020, 2021, hopefully when things are back to normal, we will choose a new decade and focus on it.
Yeah, and we also, right now with the it's the Potawatomi Art and Culture Entertainment Center and PACE. And that's, we're doing a show on a local artist, George Simons, who traveled with Grenville Dodge when he was surveying for the Union Pacific Railroad. And he's done paintings. So we had some paintings here at the library, and PACE recently received some sketches of his. So that is a collaboration there. We've also gotten requests from the Durham Western Heritage Museum over in Omaha. They've used some of our photos, and I've gotten requests from various museums across the country, usually when they're dealing with the Western expansion or even the Mormon migration. We'll get requests for some of the sketches that we have.
So we have another question, Mary. What social media do you use for the posts, and how do you measure your engagements with what you share?
Mainly Facebook. I use Facebook. We don't use, at least I don't use Twitter, and we have an Instagram account as well, but Facebook seems to be the most popular, and it hits the age group that's really interested in that. And for me, I just look at the total number of likes or posts or something like that. It's fortunately, I don't have to provide any metrics or statistics on that. So,
but I can answer to that I do provide statistics, and we look at we use the numbers that are under engagements, where it's actually, you know, some reading, some involvement in it, not just a click, as far as which number to use for reporting our statistics. And then you asked about, have you done any virtual programming? And if so, what does it look like? I have not created original virtual programming of doing anything with filming and providing. I have been, during this time of our COVID frustrations, been recording some of the presentations that have been here in the building. For example, if you went to our website right now, you would find a recording of a presentation that was done last week about a man named John Young Stone from Glenwood, who was a Civil War soldier. And when he got out of the military and the war, became one of the state legislators and then senators and then attorney generals. It was a great story, and half his family was there to attend and listen. And we recorded it, and that's on our website right now. How do I know what kind of events will draw attendees? If it's history about this area, they'll come. They just love it. And as Mary said, yes, I am kind of focused on a particular age group with all of this programming, mainly 45, 50 and up. But we have a very active community of people that are even up in their 80s and into their 90s that still are actively participating and want to hear the stories and reminisce.
Yeah, and we're also too during this time, the youth department is doing like a virtual story time and
They
stuff
are.
like that too. So it's yeah, during these times we've had to expand a little more. So that's been proving. Everybody's looking forward to Miss Anna's story time. So, and I placed a link to in the chat of our a link to our Amica site, or actually it's our local history landing page, and it'll be our digital archives, but it also has some of the blog posts that that I've done with the early citizens and such like that. So and some other things that we've worked on, and hopefully it'll get refreshed with new data soon. So
one of the big ones in that collection is the high school yearbooks for the 3 high schools in town. People love looking at them.
Yeah.
Okay, you're doing stuff in Tabor with local history and the Historical Society. Great. Yes, it is fascinating to read these articles, and the stuff they put in the paper in that day, it was like a gossip column.
It was gossip. There was no such thing as HIPAA. You know, I've learned when I was researching the nurses, you know, that one of them had her appendix out. You know, now she's home from the hospital. Yeah, and in the gossip, some of the early citizens that, you know, there's divorces and remarriages, and often kind of, if you read between the lines, you can figure out why the divorce may have happened. But yeah, Facebook has nothing on these early newspapers. It's amazing the things that you can learn about somebody, and you wonder, yeah, how are people going to learn about us 100 years from now? I don't know.
Interesting question. This is a program I have not done yet. They have done it elsewhere in the community, but I haven't done it here in the library. Our little people and the Woodwind Candy Factory and their house. Yes, it is a very good program that I need to get on my list and provide here at the library, as well as what's been done elsewhere in the community. But it's frequently seems to be that if the Historical Society puts on a program for a particular topic, they get their membership and that's about it. But if they do it over here at the library, or if I do a rendition of it, then I tend to get more of the community outside just their membership. So other minority populations, we have been building over the last 3-4 years a focus on the Hispanic community in Council Bluffs. Several of our employees are Hispanic, Latino themselves, and they're trying to do services for them, but we haven't really tried to put together yet. It's another one I'll add to my bucket list of ideas to include.
Yeah, we've done some programming and outreach. There's usually a lot of outreach with the Latino community. And if you're interested, I could, we could probably send you the email of the people that are handling that. We're fortunate that we've got a good staff and that have a lot of specialties in outreach. So.
My husband last night, as I was telling him about doing this today, was saying, well, are you going to talk about this? I said, no, I haven't done a program on that yet.
Oh.
Well, are you going to talk about this? I said, no, I haven't done a program about that yet. So he was adding to my bucket list too, like Lewis and Clark, that tromped through here, or I should say rode through here many, many years ago. And also about the Squirrel Cage Jail, which is totally cool and creepy.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories. I think even if you just start digging like I did, the serendipity of finding stories. I've often gotten down the rabbit hole of trying to, I see a story of a little boy, riding his bike down one of these steep hills, and then he broke his collarbone, and I'm like, well, who is this kid? And yeah, and next thing I know, I'm looking him up. So, Marlys, what's your goal for next Halloween?
Well, it could be the Squirrel Cage Jail this year. Oh, and that's another program that is virtually on our webpage. I actually had 2 presentations. One came to me from Wisconsin, and his name is Chad Lewis, and he does the ghosts of, or the hauntings of, pick your state, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa. He's got all kinds of stories, and he shared virtually to our community that were sitting there in the library, as well as those that were logging in online, about the hauntings. And right behind him came a man that he likes to travel. And so, yes, he was from Wisconsin, and thankfully he didn't bring any COVID germs with him from Wisconsin, but he shared a program about how he personally loves to go visit haunted locations and experience them. And my goodness, he had us believing in ghosts and had goosebumps up our spines as he shared his program. And so it's fun to explore. I mean, yes, we've got ghost stories from Squirrel Cage Jail and from up at the Dodge House and from the library. The Carnegie Library has a ghost.
Yeah.
Yes, we've got lots of ghosts in Council Bluffs. Any other questions or comments?
Ideas?
So Mary, do you have any plans for other work to bring? Oh, you could mention, Mary, that our archives has been used for several books being published.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's another thing. Over the years, it seems like we do a lot of work, like I said, we mentioned earlier, the Mormon migration, and people are very interested. And this was winter quarters across the river here on both sides of the river, on the Nebraska side and the Iowa side. And they were here until 1853. And then by that point, they started moving west farther into Salt Lake. So we got a lot of requests because George Simon's, the artist I mentioned, he did a lot of sketches of the Mormon migration of their ox carts. And, you're making me ask names. The author's name just went out of my head.
It happens to me all the time.
The railroad. Anyway, oh my gosh. But people usually hear, and we've helped other authors too. I've helped a fiction author who was interested in a Civil War general who was a friend of General Dodge's. I know people that are researching General Dodge have come here. We've got copies of his papers that are at the state archives. We have people working on their thesis. One of the doctors, well, actually Unit K, Mobile Hospital 1, a fellow used the diaries that we had. We have diaries of one of the doctors that was in Unit K, and he did his thesis on part of that unit and that doctor's experiences. So yeah, you never know. And then plus you've got families coming through. They, want to find out more what life was like when their family was here, or information about their family. And sometimes you can provide them with information, and sometimes you can't. So I wish we had more. Oh yes. Oh my God.
That's quite a story, Dawn. Yes.
And that's, yeah, we also have interest in Amelia Bloomer. Unfortunately, we don't have much of her papers. We've got a few letters that were written to her. And we do have a copy of The Lily. We discovered, yeah, we had a scrapbook in our collection that had gotten mislabeled sometime over the year. And it turns out it was actually Amelia Bloomer's scrapbook. And she had pasted, I think some articles used it as a scrapbook, but on some pages you could see where people had subscribed to The Lily, and it was like sort of her subscribers list. And then there's also a speech that I don't know if she ever gave, but it's kind of written in her hand, talking about, she was also a prohibitionist as well as a suffragette. Yeah, she didn't quite like what drink was doing to the men in the community and the effects that had on the women that were dependent upon them. So yeah, there's many stories of Council Bluffs being a lawless town and men going to the saloon and losing all the money and then coming home to the wife. And it's like, so, but I don't know if there was any other questions. Otherwise, I'll just sit and ramble about this all day.
Well, yeah, we both can. So it was delightful to be here today with you and share what's going on in our library and how we connect with and encourage and educate and entertain our community. And sometimes they bring along, I see somebody said, have you involved young people in history? One time, just to finish things up, we were lucky enough to host a Nazi camp prisoner. This lady came and we made the blessing and the mistake of telling all the history classes in Council Bluffs that we were going to have her. And we had to be turning people away at the door because a fire marshal was going to shoot us if we had packed one more person into that room. We have grandparents and parents bringing their kids along and saying, see, this is what town was like back in the day when before you were born or whatever. So yes, the community is passing on to their children and grandchildren their love of history. And I think it looks like our time is almost up. So thank you very much for hosting us today.
Yes, thank you.